What's good, everybody? We are back with another video. Now, like I said from yesterday, we're gonna keep these videos popping. You feel me? Now, today we got the regions of Alabama. We're gonna start with every region in the state of Alabama. Now, this is my definition of the regions. This isn't an official definition. This is gonna be for what I think, or the certain counties belong to certain regions. Now let's move on to the cities. Now, as I was just saying, Northern Alabama is home to a number of cities. It is probably the most densely populated part of the state as well, as it has most of Alabama's decent sized cities. That's like not too big, but they're also big enough to have a Walmart at least. Cities like Albertville, Fort Payne, Scottsboro, Coleman, Hamilton, Russellville, Muscle Shoals, Athens, they all have Walmarts at least. They'll have at least one or two Walmarts, depending on how big they are. Albertville, which is Marshall County itself has three Walmarts. So these areas is not necessarily small for Alabama standards, but they are just right. So they're not super big like Huntsville either. Even though this region of Alabama is almost completely 100% dominated by Huntsville, I would say is about 95, 94% dominated by Huntsville. Why? Because you got that 5 to 6%, which does have their own little spheres of influence in other parts of the region. I would say Florence is probably the biggest example of this, as even though Florence is nowhere near on competition of Huntsville's level, it does have its own little thing going on in the northwestern corner of the state. It got Northwest Alabama University. It has a couple of industries going on over there as well. So it's not like totally underneath the shadows of Huntsville. It just is nowhere near as big as Huntsville. Now let's get on to the geography and the metropolitan makeup of North Alabama. As you can see, I have all the metropolitan areas recognized by the federal government highlighted in different colors, representing the counties that are within these metropolitan areas. As you may see, there are three areas in gray, aka Marion, Winston, and Franklin counties, because they're not really in a metropolitan area. Although some people could consider Russellville, which is in Franklin County, to be a micropolitan area of its own. It's not really defined, so I'm not going to include it. So we kind of have Florence, Muscle Shoals. They're like twin cities on opposite sides of the river, of the Tennessee River, which is in the pink. You got Decatur, which is in the blue, which is the second biggest area in the region. Decatur area is kind of like the underdog. It's like Huntsville's little puppy in a way. Like it's not small for Alabama standards. Like it has a mall, it has multiple WalMarts, etc. But it's still like so close to Huntsville to the point where it's like Huntsville is growing so fast to the west that it's starting to overtake a lot of Decatur areas in limestone. So that's why I would say Decatur metropolitan area is definitely like Huntsville's like smaller brother who's like right there. Coleman, like, as we just discussed, Coleman is kind of like the middle point. It could kind of pass for Metro Birmingham as well as its own little thing close to Huntsville. I put it in the North Alabama region because of its like distinct culture with North Alabama. I kind of feel like Coleman has more of ties to North Alabama than it does to Metro Birmingham. So we're going to keep it where I kept it at. And I definitely think Coleman has more connections to like Winston County or Morgan County than it does to Blount County and to Jefferson County. So we're going to keep it at that. Albertville, which is in Marshall County and Orange, I would say it's kind of like Decatur, but smaller. It's like it wants to be closer to Huntsville. It's like it kind of shows economically that it could be tied to Huntsville. It is tied to Huntsville a little bit with Highway 431 and I think another major highway going to the city. But since there's no internet connect, I say internet, I meant interstate. My bad, people. But since there's no interstate connection in Marshall County, actually, fun fact: Marshall County is the biggest county in Alabama, home to over 100,000 people at this point, without any interstate connection. The nearest interstate is I-59 going through DeKalb and Etowah counties. So I would say Albertville has the potential to reach Decatur levels, I would say, but it's like Huntsville, Decatur, Albertville, if that makes sense. Then you have Fort Payne in yellow. Fort Payne, even though Fort Payne is considered as part of the Huntsville Decatur combined statistical area, I find it to be very odd because Fort Payne don't really seem to have any economic connection to Huntsville, as it's pretty far out. You got to pass through a county to get to Huntsville, and both of those counties are in themselves not as connected as, for example, Limestone is to Huntsville, or even Morgan County is to Huntsville. So I kind of find Fort Payne's classification as being a part of the combined area with Huntsville to be very odd, but by it being its own micropolitan area is understandable. DeKalb County is home to over 70,000 people. It is a pretty decent county for Alabama standards. Now let's move on to Scottsboro. Now this is the one that I also find odd because you would think Scottsboro will be closer to Huntsville in terms of metropolitan standards, but it's not. It's actually more entwined economically with Chattanooga, Tennessee. As a fact, Scottsboro, which is Jackson County, is actually located in the Chattanooga combined statistical area, not Huntsville's. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And if I had to guess why that's the case, it's because there's really no economic ties to these two counties. Huntsville expands west. It starts in Madison County and goes immediately west because there's a huge mountain range in between Madison and Jackson County to separate the two counties. So because of that, it hinders a lot of economic development between these two counties. And Scottsboro, along with its little smaller towns along the highway, kind of go northeast towards the Tennessee state border, which is also towards Chattanooga. So that's why Scottsboro is kind of hindered to expand west because of the mountains, and Huntsville is kind of hindered to expand east because of the mountains. So that's why these two cities, even though they do border each other, and that Scottsboro is in Alabama, they don't have that much economic ties to be considered as part of the same combined metropolitan areas. And then, like I said, you got over here in the far northwest corner, which is Florence and Muscle Shoals. Muscle Shoals and Florence, they really do their own thing. I don't see that much of connections towards the big to the big boy of Huntsville. I don't see that much connections to the area. I kind of feel like they really do kind of just move their own way in their own pace. I think that they just by themselves, really. Lauderdale and Colbert, they just kind of do their own thing. I mean, so you would find it very hard to believe, but they actually are smaller than Decatur. The Florence Marshall Shoals area is slightly smaller than Decatur, and Decatur is considered Huntsville's smaller little brother, in my opinion. So that should also tell you something just how big Florence may seem, but it's not that big at the same time. And also, I would probably say it is the biggest. No, it is the second biggest metropolitan area in the state without an interstate. The first one being Dothan. But yes, Florence is pretty far from the interstate as well. Florence and Muscle Shoals itself are about an hour away from I-65, so it takes a little minute to get there. Trust me, I used to go there a lot when I was younger, and it does take a little minute to get there. So it is kind of isolated from the rest of the state as well because of how far northwest it is from the rest of the state. You got cross. Now let's move on to politics. Now, North Alabama is by far the most conservative region in Alabama. And that's saying something, considering that Alabama in itself is one of the most conservative states in this country. Trump won this state by like 30 points. That is huge. And North Alabama is home to the most Republican counties in the state. Um, for example, Winston County, which is highlighted right here, is the most Republican county in the state. It has always been the most Republican county in the state, even during the like Jim Crow era of Alabama, where Democrats were in like total one-party state control of the state when every county was going Democratic. Winston County, if you go back into the history of the maps of the elections, Winston County will always be the you know the one county to not flip. It will always be the one outlier that would not flip blue. It will always go red. And if it went blue, it would go blue by such a small amount to the point where it's like a tilt margin or like 1 to 5%. So Winston County has always had this legacy of being the only true Republican county in the state of Alabama, even during those Democratic times when Democrats were in control of the state. Now, the most liberal leaning county, well, I think that's not that surprising that it's Huntsville. It's home to the University of Alabama in Huntsville, so it is a big university presence here. It is a bit of minority presence here too, And because North Alabama is, in my opinion, probably the most Caucasian part of the state too. Like there's probably the least diverse part of the state, and the politics do show it. All these counties up here in Northwest Alabama and Northeast Alabama are pretty Republican and are pretty Caucasian dominated. So that does make a lot of sense too. But I will also say that you will think Florence, which is over in the northwest corner, remember, you would think Florence and Muscle Shoals would be pretty leaning to the left, or like at least in the lean Republican column, like how Madison County is. But that's not the case. And with 70% or above for Trump in 2024, why that's the case? Just the overall nature of North Alabama. North Alabama is pretty hard to crack. And even now, Huntsville is still hard to crack. Madison County still goes Republican. And I think it will be at least a decade or two before Huntsville eventually moves to the left. But I do think Madison County is the most progressively Democratic moving county in the state, considering the fact that you have other counties like Mobile, Jefferson County, which I would say is probably trending to the right, but Madison County is one of the few counties in the state that are trending left. So I do think to expect Madison County, which is home to Huntsville, to eventually go left in the coming decades. But as of right now, it is still a pretty Republican county, and every single county in North Alabama went right in 2024. These are 2024 margins. So as you can see, every single county in conclusion, that's pretty much all I have about North Alabama. It's pretty special to the state of Alabama as a whole. It's pretty valued. It's pretty sought after, pretty much sought after because of how powerful of a city Huntsville is. And I know I just kept bringing up the city of Huntsville, but I kind of had to. It's really, really that powerful in North Alabama. The whole region is kind of centered on if Huntsville is doing good. If Huntsville's doing good, then the region is doing good. The only area that I would consider that's kind of like outside of Huntsville's reach is probably the Florence area. As Florence and Muscle Shoals do really seem to be kind of doing their own thing. They're close to Huntsville where they can get to the city for like Costco or something like that, but they're just far enough to where they won't be commuting back and forth on a consistent basis for like jobs or working in Madison County. So I do think it's really just Huntsville, Florence, are like them two major like go-getter cities in the region, and then you have Decatur along with Albertville and Coleman, which is kind of like the secondary cities. Now Decatur is big. Decatur is bigger than Florence, but I just feel like it is so overshadowed by Huntsville that it doesn't really have a voice for itself. It's really just another. It's starting to be another suburb of Huntsville, but just a really big suburb of Huntsville, if you get what I'm saying. But I'm going to continue doing these regions of Alabama. I kind of have a lot of fun doing them. I do realize that I didn't talk about like the geography of North Alabama. I mean, to be honest, it's just really mountainous. It's like the southern end of the Appalachian Mountain Range. So it's really mountainous out here. It's not home to the highest peak in the state, though. We will get to that. It's not the home to the highest peak, but it is a pretty culturally mountainous Appalachian region. I'm sorry if I botched that word. Some people say Appalachia. I'd say Appalachia. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not from Appalachia, but I would say this region is the most culturally tied to the Appalachian region. Like, the areas of like West Virginia and Tennessee, Eastern Tennessee, and stuff like that. I do think this part of Alabama is definitely more in that type of culture, especially the further northeast you go, like towards DeKalb County, I mean, or Jackson County, and even like Marshall County. Those counties are really like tied to that. And believe it or not, Northwest Alabama too is also pretty tied to the Appalachian culture. Areas like Winston County, Lawrence, Franklin, Marion counties, those counties are also really connected to the Appalachian culture, as well as having those hills and mountains that the Appalachian Mountains bring to the state of Alabama.